And thank you for watching. I'm going to talk a little bit about this Iranian nuclear facility attack that happened. Supposedly, they had a blackout in the Natanz facility. So the Natanz facility is about 100 miles, approximately 100 miles south of Tehran, and it's one of their major facilities there. I think it's one of their prime facilities. That's where most of the advanced, more modern centrifuges are. This is one of their pretty important facilities. And this past weekend on the 11th, there was an explosion underneath. Now, mind you, this facility is about 20 foot under the ground. It's a very secure facility. It is extremely difficult to get down there. And so they hadn't, they just claimed that they had a blackout and they tried to kind of downplay it. But some of the accounts, when you listen to some of the reports coming out of there and out of different parts of the world, you can tell that it was an explosion. It wasn't just some cyber attack on their centrifuges. It was an explosion because one of the scientists kind of fell in a pretty large hole. And why would there be this hole all of a sudden, right? He ended up breaking his arms and hurting himself pretty badly. It was something that, now going back to this facility, it is a difficult facility to attack, right, from the surface, because it is not only 20 feet underground, it's just extremely well guarded, and it's a pretty tough facility to break into. So it's not that easy to attack it. So obviously, they had a blackout. They admitted that. The Iranians admitted that they had a blackout. It knocked the power out of there, and some accounts, you can tell that there was an explosion because obviously there was a pretty big hole down there, and one of the scientists fell in there. So, this is right at the eve of when there is a conference about to take place in Vienna to restart the discussion with JCP. OA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. This was instated by the Obama administration. You might recall that. So under that plan, just a little bit about that JCPOA. It's simply designed. It was simply designed to keep Iran from reaching that 1 year level, where they were, say, about a year. Or 300 so days a year, 300 days or so before they were able to get that weapons-grade uranium. So it was designed to keep them from getting to that stage, that whole JCPO. So it's a subject I could discuss it in lot more detail, but and it was negotiated by the Obama administration, and then naturally when the Trump administration came in, they basically backed out of that deal and basically imposed sanctions on him, on the Iranian government. Iran has a lot of sanctions against him. You could probably 15 or 1,600 different types of sanctions on them. No one in the world, even Iranian allies, right, would want another nuclear weapon in that, another nuclear power in that region. So they certainly do not want Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. So this whole deal with them negotiating, and you ask, well, why are they even negotiating? It's simply to now this is purely my assessment. This is simply to give them a little more time. And as long as they are appearing to negotiate with the Western, governments and different nations around the world, it gives them this leverage in the region that they are someone to be reckoned with, and they're about to get nuclear weapons. So as a regional, when you look at the geopolitical ramifications of that, it's in Iran's favor to appear that they are negotiating to not make any nuclear weapons, not get to that nuclear weapons technology. So this whole negotiation that's about to restart under the Biden administration is simply that. So they would maintain not getting to that 1-year marker before they're able to get weapons-grade uranium to make a nuclear bomb. And of course, within the region, you have the Israelis. And when you look at this particular attack, the information coming out, unofficial information that's coming out of Tel Aviv, is clearly that they were behind this attack. And they're not officially claiming it, but unofficially they are claiming it, that this was designed to knock out their power. And of course, they won't give you full details, but Mossad had something to do with it. And there may be a possibility it could have been a joint venture with possibly the Saudis or even our Central Intelligence Agency here in the United States. So it's a possibility. I mean, I couldn't say for certain, but one thing is for sure. This is one of the several attacks against the Iranians that Bibi Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, has launched against the Iranian government. It is a threat to the Israelis as far as Iran acquiring nuclear weapons technology. And when they get to this weapons-grade uranium, or they get close to it, is when it becomes a lot more threatening. So this whole JCPOA thing deal was to keep them from getting to that stage. So this is not a singular attack by the Israelis. If you recall, in December, there was an attack that killed one of their scientists, which was one of their top scientists. So going back to the facility itself, there was an explosion in there, whether the Iranians admit it or not fully, but you can get different accounts of what's coming out of different parts of the world, that it wasn't an explosion of some sort, and it was underground, it was in the facility, and it knocked the power out of there. So what it did was basically took their central power, shut down the central power, power supply to the centrifuges, as well as the emergency power. So they really, were in that blackout condition for a while there and suffered a little bit of damage, which probably sets them back another year. So as far as them getting closer to this weapons grade. These new, there was an attack a few years back where, some of you might remember Stuxnet, that malware that was sent to that facility that basically shut down all the centrifuges. What it did was basically told the centrifuges to not cool down and to basically overheat. So that's how they managed to kind of shut it down for a while and set them back quite a few years. When you really look at it from that point of view. And, fast forward, the last few attacks, and you remember So in December, there was that scientist that was killed. As long as Iran is coming across to the world that they are on their way to weapons-grade uranium levels, gives them a tremendous amount of leverage as far as the global community is concerned, because no one wants them to have nuclear weapons. You have bad enough. You got Pakistan there with nuclear weapons, which is predominantly a Sunni country, and now you have the Iranians trying to get their own weapons technology. So it is not something that's looked upon by the global community as a good thing for the region. Of course, Saudi Arabia does not want it, and why would they? They're kind of arch enemies of the Iranians. They have never seen eye to eye because going back many years, they had an attack there and it was supposedly backed by the Iranians. That's another story. But the Iranians and the Saudis do not see eye to eye, right? There's no secret there. And there is a possibility, in my assessment, there is a possibility this could have been a joint venture between the Mossad and the Saudi intelligence apparatus. So it's a possibility. I'm not saying for sure. But I know one thing, when you're listening to what's coming out of Tel Aviv, unofficial accounts, people are claiming responsibility. Israelis are. So that is, I'm almost certain that that's where the attack came from. So how directly the Mossad was involved in it or not, we don't know yet. And actually, it's difficult to find that out because these things are not really revealed. And Iran is not going to reveal everything that happened to it, right? So, because they're pretty tight-lipped about what kind of damage they even took from this particular attack. Now this is at the eve where Sergei Lavrov was in Tehran. Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense from the United States, is in Tel Aviv, and this is happening on April 11th, right at the eve of the new deal being, or the Biden administration is starting talks with the other European Union and other global community members to restart that Iran deal, which was basically terminated by the Trump administration. And, so they're about to restart those talks in Vienna. And here, Sergei Lavrov is Russian ambassador is in Tehran. And then you got Secretary of Defense here in Tel Aviv. And here this explosion happened. And it's really, frankly, not a surprise to me because so long as Iran is moving towards weapons-grade technology, weapons-grade uranium, it will have, attacks after attacks after attacks. I mean, this is not something that will stop for the Iranians. And the Israelis, I know it's not a real, territorial enemy as far as the territory is concerned. However, it's an ideological, enemy there, because when you look at the rhetoric that comes out of Iran, it's very anti-Israel, and death to Israel, death to America, death to Israel. So this is an ongoing thing since 1979, since Ayatollah Khomeini came in. And those of you who watch history, the whole Iranian hostage crisis began this whole animosity towards the West and the Israelis and all that. So, so long as Iran is given the perception that it is, it is getting closer to weapons-grade uranium, it will have some leverage as far as talks are concerned. Reality is no one really knows how close Iran is. It could be really far back, and it's just given that appearance that it's very close, because the current centrifuges, the ones that they took out or they shut down, were a lot more. They're a lot more advanced than the ones that were shut down before a few years back through that Stuxnet malware. So these were pretty advanced, and they're from watching all the other research on it, you can tell that they had succeeded in bringing this technology, further. And in some ways, when people ask me, was that a good thing to do to negotiate with the Iranians vis-a-vis the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Actions? I personally look at it from a very different point of view. My assessment is very different because I understand the region really well, and I personally have been studying it since 1979, since April 1st of 1979. I was very young at that time, but it piqued my interest when I looked at Ayatollah Khomeini, who came in from France and took over, and the whole hostage crisis happened, and it went on for about a year, from 79 all the way to November of 79, all the way to 1981, January, when Ronald Reagan took over and they had released those hostages. But that, ever since then, it piqued my interest, and I had been studying Iran and the region ever since then. As an independent researcher, mind you, I'm not affiliated with anyone. So whatever assessments that I may give to anyone, they are my own personal assessments and my own, according to my own research. So from my own point of view, my own research tells me that you can't negotiate with Iran in the way the Western countries are. It's because of the mindset. This is a very different mindset that you're dealing with. Number one, you are looking at a theocratic government who came in on the whole ideology of uniting the entire Middle East. So it was not, when Khomeini came in, just a little history there, when Ayatollah Khomeini came in 1979, his plan was to not just bring a theocratic government in Iran, but to go above and beyond that and try to create a hegemony over the entire region. So the Khomeini's plan was to go into Iraq, invade Iraq at some point, or and we saw the 8-year war with them. But his initial plan was to go into Iraq, go into Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, okay, and go all the way into towards the middle to the Mediterranean, literally push Israel into the ocean, okay. So it was a serious, it was a serious plan that, according to Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini, he looked at it as something that wasn't too ambitious. He said, I think this is what the community in the Middle East region actually wants. They would like to revive the old, not the old Ottoman Empire, but an empire led by Iran, because Iran was actually showing ambitions for that. So it was popular during the uprising when the hostage situation happened. You recall the youngsters were all for it, and they were like, "This is awesome. We're going to practically take over the Middle East and push Israel into the ocean, and then slowly move back towards Europe." And 2008, I actually wrote a book on this situation, describing the Shia Crescent. The title of my book was Shia Crescent. So basically my book gives you a little bit of history and what the Iranian ambitions were when Khomeini came in, and what exactly he was looking to accomplish as far as the region was concerned. So the geopolitical ambitions of the Iranians were not just to Iran, limited to Iran, but they encompassed the entire Middle East, okay? And they wanted to go all the way into Europe. This is according to the Khomeini plan. So when you understand that history and you understand that mindset and how this whole thing came about 40 years ago with Khomeini coming back from exile and having that whole uprising and then moving in time. I know he passed away, but then of course his plan still exists in the shadows. And if you were to talk to someone were to interview the supreme leader there, I'm sure he would say that he would honor the original Ayatollah Khomeini plan to take over the entire Middle East. So this is not something that's something that they take lightly, because it was given to them by their supreme leader, the initial supreme leader. So the Iranians take this position very seriously as far as them acquiring nuclear weapons technology. Because here they're looking at Pakistan, who acquired nuclear technology and ended up making the bomb under A.Q. Khan, and they became a nuclear power. So this is something Iran was trying to accomplish even before Pakistan came up with their own nuclear bomb. And so currently, the way you look at it, you could try to negotiate with the Iranians, but it is not going to be something that would ever be successful in any way. It would just be posturing on both sides. We would say, okay, well, we're keeping them from getting to that 1-year marker, and after JCPOA, there's something else could come in, and the new negotiations with the Biden administration could lead to another deal with the Iranians. But when you study the Iranians as long as I have, and I've studied them for many, many years, specifically the Iranians. Why? Because I always believed that Iran could actually overplay its hand and trigger a Third World War-like situation. This was my understanding of it, because when I looked at the players on the global level, a world war constitutes 20 or more nations involved in some sort of a war-like situation on both sides, right? So 20 nations or more constitutes a world war. So I always felt that Iran could be the trigger. It may overplay its hand and actually trigger a world war. Like, that's why I studied Iran as diligently as I did. So when you look at their survivability with all the different administrations they have gone through, and they have survived pretty much all the different administrations that came, Democrat, Republican. For a while, I thought when Trump came in, Trump may actually launch some sort of an attack. When Soleimani, one of their generals, was killed, and you recall they retaliated and sent some couple of dud missiles into Iraq, and that whole fiasco with him, the general being killed. He was one of their top general. He was a pretty well-respected person in Iran, and he was there since day one of the revolution. So looking at that current situation, my fear that Iran could overplay its hand, will probably never subside, because I truly believe that. I feel that if Iran is not checked in the sense where all its nuclear technology advancements are basically neutralized, and we have confirmation of that, Iran will consistently try to get closer and closer to it, and at some point it could come to a point like when you look at that UN United Nations meeting where Bibi Netanyahu had shown this little graph and showed the red line there with this little, bomb thing, and then the fuse on it. You might recall that. It could come to a point where all sides basically are fed up, and the Israelis may, whether it's Bibi Netanyahu or someone else that decides that we need to take this thing further, whether they have support from the United States or the other allies, even Saudi Arabia is working with the Israelis in some, unofficial ways, or official ways possibly, to see if they can neutralize the Iranian nuclear technology, technological advances. So for all we know, Saudi Arabia was also involved in this last attack on April 11th. That said, going back to my point and why I feel, in my assessment, that Iran could play overplay their hand and literally trigger a World War-like situation. And it's not just my understanding, but many analysts, policy analysts, look at it and fear that this could become a reality at some point, because Iran is never going to give up its ambition, and Israel has the right to defend itself, okay? Because if you have rhetoric coming out of Iran, death to America, death to Israel, and Holocaust never happened, and when you hear things of that nature, that that is not well received in the Israeli community, and at that point, Tel Aviv has a right to act in its defense to, on behalf of their own sovereignty. So, and they will not be bullied because, when you look at it, they are surrounded by not all enemies. I know Jordan is kind of friendly. Egypt's also somewhat friendly to them. Saudi Arabia is kind of talking to them. But when you really look at it, when you look at the Arabs and you look at the Israelis, there's always going to be that rift there, and there will always be a suspicion that someone could all of a sudden decide to switch sides because they feel like Iran has that leverage of having a nuclear weapon, and they may feel like they could switch sides and go towards the Iranians. That's a real possibility that could happen. And that's exactly what the Iranians are counting on, that once they are perceived as a nuclear nation, most of the nations within the region may start to cooperate with Iran, and Iran is counting on that. And Tel Aviv and Washington know that this is an Iranian play that simply is going to be played as far as the future is concerned, because why give that up? So long as you're given that perception, from Iran's point of view, so long as you're given that perception, they're able to negotiate with the West. That we're getting closer, release some tension on the sanctions. In the past deal with the Obama administration, they were relieved of several $100 million several billion dollars in revenue that was held due to the sanctions. So they ended up benefiting quite a bit. So you would say that there are advancements in the centrifuges, the current, the more modern centrifuges that they acquired happened due to the release of funds from the sanctions. So one could argue that or state that look, this is exactly what happened. You released the funds. Obama administration negotiated with them. They released the funds, several $billion, and there you have it. Here's the proof. The proof is in the pudding. They ended up getting a lot more modern centrifuges. Those centrifuges, the ones that the Israelis just kind of temporarily, I'm not sure how many of them were shut down or incapacitated, but they were pretty advanced, extremely modern. They spin at a supersonic speed. So there was, that whole factor of, did the money end up getting into, the nuclear project, Iran's nuclear project, and then further enhance it? So one could say that by releasing all those funds to Iran, we actually aided Iran in becoming more advanced. And this is what the Israeli suspicion is, that if you were to give Iran this capability, it would eventually gain enough leverage where most of the regional countries would start to ally with the Iranians. So it could be a huge geopolitical shift as far as Iran is concerned if it were to acquire nuclear weapons. It will never ever use it. It will never ever use it, but in terms of trying to acquire it, it could inadvertently trigger a World War-like situation, because at some point the Israelis are going to have to decide, and they have tried before, because even with the Obama administration, they tried. I recall Bibi Netanyahu calling Obama while he was on Air Force One to get permission to attack the facility in, I believe, in Natanz. As far as I know, it was Natanz, but the Obama administration didn't give him that permission. So he had to, the planes were already in the air. Israelis had to actually recall those planes back. So it could have been an attack if President Obama had given the authority, the permission to, or go ahead to attack, and that they would back them if there was a regional conflict that erupted from that. So Iran could overplay their hand. They could possibly, in my assessment, quite possibly trigger a World War-like situation. It's not beyond the realm of possibility, because when you study the region as I have, you can tell that post-pandemic, when you're looking at the region now, there is quite a bit of frustration there. It's quite a bit of anger, and economies are tanking pretty much everywhere, and everyone is looking to revive their economy. And so tensions are high in that sense. So if you look at what the Israelis did in this situation, many in the policy community wouldn't blame the Israelis for doing that, because they're acting in their own national interest at that point, because they know if Iran ever gets nuclear technology, nuclear weapons technology, it would change the local geopolitical situation there and give Iran the ability to have hegemony over the region. And that would mean absolute worlds to Iran at that point, if he were to get to, even if you look at, if they were to get to the nuclear grades uranium, or weapons grade uranium is what they call it. If they could enrich it to that point, they would have a huge, and they could somehow prove that, it would be huge for the Iranians to actually have that. it could be a game changer at that point. That's my opinion, and that's my assessment. In my assessment, I don't feel that the global community, for one, because no one is for Iran acquiring nuclear weapons. Even the Russians are not, Chinese are not, and the Chinese trade with them. They are their largest export trader, export partner, and so they're with Iran, and so when you look at the global community being against it, and Iran constantly trying to get to that point where it has the nuclear capability or gets closer to it, you would ask, well, why is Iran trying to get this? It has, because naturally, if you were to ever use it, it would basically be leveled out, right? And it's very true. Iran will never use the nuclear technology in the nuclear weapons on anyone, including Israel. Because when you really look at it from that point of view, that is not something that Iran would be able to survive if he were to ever even use such a thing. So it's just for leverage. It's nothing more. And the leverage ends up giving them the alliances that Iran is looking for within the region, therefore giving it the hegemony in the Middle East region. And it's always, eyeballing Saudi Arabia, because that is something that's like a historical itch that they feel like that they have because of their history, and most that study history, but that's completely getting into the history of it, and I don't want to bore anyone with that. But there is a Shia-Sunni split there. It's more like the kind of like the Catholic Protestant split and the wars during many years back. But it's similar to that, but it's real, and there is always that underlying animosity between the Shia and the Sunnis. So let me leave it, pretty much there. This attack was by the Israeli intelligence operation. I'm almost certain that it was, because there is some unofficial chatter that's coming out of Tel Aviv that's stating that it was the Mossad and possibly even Saudi Arabia involved in it, possibly. And of course, you could say that they had the American blessing, because look, it would have embarrassed Floyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, just arriving there that weekend where the attack is happening in Natanz. And so if the Secretary of Defense didn't know that, it would be pretty embarrassing. So I'm sure that at some level, the U.S. government, Washington, had been made aware that there was something in progress. And I'm almost certain of that, because it would have embarrassed Floyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, and it would not look right. So, and I don't think Tel Aviv would do that. So that said, this attack that was placed, it was very right at the eve of new deals taking place in Vienna to kind of renegotiate Iran is wanting to renegotiate the sanctions, because it's actually choking them to death, and they would like to have some more relief there, because the Trump administration had pulled the plug on that deal and basically put more sanctions on them. So they're looking to reverse that. They're hoping, the Iranians are hoping that they could reverse that, and hopefully negotiate with the Biden administration to have some more money to their name, because naturally their population is suffering a great deal. When you study the region and you study Iran, Iran is a key player there, and one of the key players, besides Saudi Arabia, of course. They're both key, but then Iran is a dangerous situation, because at any point it could get so hot and trigger something that's pretty dangerous for the region, not to mention the global community being involved in it. It could choke out the supplies from the Strait of Hormuz, all the oil supplies that are coming out of there. And Iran always consistently threatens that Persian Gulf area and tries to keep that card there, that basically we're going to choke out the rest of the world if we don't get our way. So it's one of those nations that difficult to negotiate with, but the global community kind of looks at this broader picture and says, well, if we were to say not negotiate with Iran, here's what the unknowns are. And when you talk to the experts and you come to the conclusions, independent analysts like me, here I'm saying that in my assessment that it could actually trigger something that's difficult to put a stop to at some point. And what I mean by that, it could actually trigger a World War-like situation, and no one is really looking forward to that. But it could actually happen. If you look at the First World War, it was a singular incident of a assassination that triggered First World War. Okay, so most of the world wars begin exactly in a very unusual way, where there is a trigger and then 20 or so more nations are involved on both sides. So that's my assessment. That's the way I see it. But this attack was pretty much unofficially by the Israelis, and I'm sure the Mossad was involved, and they had to have some blessing from Washington. That's also my assessment. Otherwise, it doesn't look right as far as Tel Aviv is concerned. Here, attack is happening, and the defense secretary is arriving from the United States. I think I'll leave it at that, but I'm going to be making a few more videos explaining some possible, historical aspects of what Iran, formerly known as Persia, what the history there is with the whole Shia-Sunni split and how that translates into the region being kind of, in tension, so to speak. Because there's always the Shia-Sunni tension there, and that's never going to go away, because that's that's a religious and ideological difference there. So, that's something that the region always have to deal with now till forever. So, so I'm going to leave it at that, and then I'll try to make another video. Just so the viewers know, I'll be making another video on Myanmar situation. The genocide there, what's taking place in Myanmar, Burma. Those of you know Burma. So I'll comment on that in the next video, so look out for that. So thank you for watching. Just subscribe, please share, and click the like button, and I'll see you on the next video. Thank you for watching.